Welcome to the Disrupting Obesity podcast. I'm Charlotte Skanes, and I'll be sharing ways to regain control over your body and lose an extreme amount of weight naturally. Being fat is about so much more than just the food. It's about your relationship with food. That means that dealing with your weight is about more than just the food, too. You have to change that relationship. You have to start disrupting obesity. All right, so this whole 9 situation clearly got out of hand, but I'm going to keep running with it. And we already know that it's going to take 9 episodes to get it out of my system, but we're going to get there. I'll catch you up in case you're coming into this midstream. And know first that I have a thing with numbers. I don't mind the teasing I get about it from my flamingos in the DMs. A lot of you who've been listening for a while have picked up on it. But 2 episodes ago, which was number 68, a number that holds absolutely no significance to me at all, but it aired on 0909. And when I realized that was going to happen, I started thinking about fun things I could do with lists of 9. It started with 9 things that I wished I'd known when I was losing weight. Then I did my 9 favorite tips. But I have a list of other lists of 9. 9 ways to make things easier, 9 ways to maintain your weight loss, 9 things to do to keep yourself going when you got a lot of weight to lose. There's a bunch of them. For the Ask Whatever episodes that are caught up in those, because I know we had pretty much an entire summer of Ask Whatever, and then we had the Gladys Ask Whatever takeover. But we're back to the regular schedule, and I only typically do these episodes once a month. Now, since I seem to be pretty hung up on this whole 9 thing, that means 2 Ask Whatevers, starting with this one, fall under that umbrella. And the thing that immediately jumped into my mind is that I should make myself answer 9 questions that I've been avoiding. I made that decision before realizing I was going to have to do this twice, but I'm all in with this one, and I like being backed into a corner. If you've been with me for a while, you'll also know that I just keep a master spreadsheet with all the questions that come in. When they come in more than once, I write them down more than once, and I write them pretty much in chronological order based on when I get them. I highlight each of those little cells when I answer them, so I know that the closer an unhighlighted question is to the top of the list, the longer it's been sitting on there. What I've done is I've written out the 9 first questions left on that spreadsheet, and we're just going to move through them one at a time. I've also included a good for you Gladys that I haven't dealt with so that she doesn't feel excluded. I don't even necessarily have specific reasons why I've been avoiding all of these particular questions. A lot of it's just the way my process works. When I'm writing a new episode, one of these Ask Whatever ones anyway, I just start scrolling through my list until a question catches my eye and my wheels start turning and I start coming up with an answer. So this is a little different because I'm answering these at gunpoint. But they're all really good questions. So I'm glad to be getting to them. Well, most of them. The first one on our list isn't a question. It's just a note I made that I needed to do another Ask Whatever segment on protein because so many of you wrote in for more information. So we're just going to call this one Protein 2. Okay, so way back in the second ever Ask Whatever, they weren't even called that then, but that was episode 22. And we're on episode 70 today with our 22nd Ask Whatever in the series, which is kind of funny given my thing with numbers. But anyway, way back when I had several people, but I had someone send in a general question about protein back then. So I answered it. Because of the way a lot of you listen to the podcast, starting at the beginning and then working your way through, and thank you for working your way through those initial episodes with me, I was absolutely terrified and I had no clue what I was doing. I'm not sure that I do now, but I'm not completely terrified anymore. So that's kind of nice. But it means that I get questions about older episodes all the time, and I love it. The questions and the whole listening from the beginning thing. I've gotten so many questions asking specifically for more on protein. Now, I've answered some very specific protein questions when they've come in, like the time I explained why I can't use protein shakes or powders. The short answer, many of my specialists have just explicitly forbidden it. I've talked about whether or not I focused on protein while I was losing weight. Short answer, I didn't. That's also the long answer too, by the way. So proteins come up, but I haven't done the continuation that you were looking for when it comes to that bit of general information that I gave you. And given that this is one of the first questions that I've been avoiding, you know that it's been on the list for a while. the first time around, I gave you 3 reasons why you should make sure you're getting enough protein. We talked about the thermic effect of food, the hormones that eating protein releases, and the way it makes you feel fuller longer, protein, but only superficially. So you've been looking for more information on protein. We might as well do it. The biggest reason I've been avoiding this one is that I don't like preaching nutrition information. That doesn't work. Worse, it tends to turn people off completely. But you asked for this specifically, and I get why. Everybody's talking about protein. It's the darling of weight loss culture right now, and for good reason. If you listen to last week's episode, you'll know that I think focusing on fiber is more important than chasing macros. But having a handle on protein is undeniably helpful. It isn't the be all and the end all that it's made out to be, though. Calories are still key, the only key. The carnivore diet works the same way every other weight loss method works. It puts you into a calorie deficit. And if it doesn't, you'll gain weight, which is also the same as every other weight loss method. If you're in a calorie surplus, you'll gain weight, and you have to be in a deficit to lose, no matter what kind of food you're eating. If you eat nothing but protein, not a good idea, by the way. Please don't do that. But for the sake of this argument, I'm just making a point, Gladys. If you eat nothing but protein and you're in a calorie deficit, you'll lose weight. Same as either one of the other macros. If you eat nothing but carbs in a deficit, you'll lose weight. Eat nothing but fat in a deficit and you'll lose weight. I don't recommend either one of those either. But understanding the role protein plays is important. It can help with your weight loss. You also need to understand your goals. I'm here talking with you in a weight loss capacity. The conversation about protein is very different when it comes to putting on muscle, for example. It's a totally different conversation. First off, you absolutely do not have to hit a specific number of grams of protein per day to lose weight. That whole narrative is horse shit. Like a big one trending right now is that you should eat your goal weight in grams of protein each day. It's not necessary. Not a number to stress out over. Here's why. My body needs 50 grams of protein a day to do its thing optimally, not the 137 grams that this fad is pushing. When I started losing weight, my goal was 155 pounds, and I can't even imagine trying to take down 155 grams of protein a day. That's like 570 grams of steak that I would have to eat. It's 1.25 pounds. I used an online calculator, Gladys. Get off my ass. I know I would be getting protein from other food sources at the same time, but that's so much steak, and I'm making a point. Your body needs your weight in kilos times 0.8 grams of protein each day. Like I said, it's a different kettle of kittens if you're trying to put on muscle, but that's not what we're talking about here. When it comes to weight loss, protein matters. And stuff like the thermic effect of food is really interesting if you're into the science side. That's the number of calories that your body uses to digest food. Protein needs the most. Then there's the science stuff with hormones and the way that protein helps you to feel fuller longer. And I'm not saying not to dive into that stuff. I'm not saying there won't come a time in your journey where learning to incorporate that information won't be useful. I'm saying right now, focusing on things like how many grams of protein you're getting can be a distraction from the real work you need to be doing. It's not about the food. It's not about how often you're eating carbs or whether or not your plate is a rainbow or how many grams of protein you're getting. Focusing on things like that instead of eating the foods you enjoy in a calorie deficit means that you won't have the mental or emotional space to deal with the underlying forces that are driving your choices and your overeating. The toxic diet industry wants you to focus on the surface stuff so that you'll keep coming back again and again. Don't get distracted. Number 2 today is, how do I stick to my diet when I'm invited out or to somebody's house? Oh, there are a couple of questions today that I see a lot that I don't like answering for a couple of reasons. Sometimes there are questions that I feel like nobody really wants to hear the answer to, which makes them less than fun to talk about. The other type of question is tough because the answer is straightforward, and this one has the opposite problem. I mean, there's a simple answer, but the answer here is going to change based on a lot of variables. So even though the answer is straightforward in principle, it's complicated at the same time because the individual nuts and bolts are different for everybody when you put it into practice. You stick to your diet when you're invited out or to somebody's house by keeping yourself in a calorie deficit. And sometimes, most of the time, that involves some planning. When I knew I was going out, I would do whatever I could to have more calories to play with for that meal. In my case, it was easier when I was invited to dinner because that's usually my first meal of the day. So I was going into it with all of that day's calories, and I just had to worry about keeping a lid on what I ate after I left. Most people are in the opposite situation, and they need to keep a lid on their calories in the hours leading up to that meal. This is where volume eating is going to be your friend. Water is going to be your friend. So is fiber. And you're in luck because at least two of those things go hand in hand. Non-starchy vegetables. They're great for fiber and great for volume. They also tend to have a fair bit of water in them. So there's that too. And I know vegetables can suck. I wasn't a big veggie lover, and the ones that I love were the starchy ones. Potatoes, carrots, corn, beets, peas, and they're all fabulous, especially potatoes. I talked about them last week, so I'm not going to go into it again. And they're good for volume eating too. But right now I'm looking for super low calorie volume eating, the kind where you're saving as many calories as you can. That's the non-starchy vegetables jam. They're all over it. I'm going to veer off for just a second because I want to underline what I mean with the distinction between those things. Um, I know they might not be your favorite ones, but start slow. Find a gateway vegetable. I found my way in with rainbow peppers. I'd only tried the green ones as a kid, and I hated them. But the red, yellow, and orange ones, they weren't so bad, especially with dip. I'll remind you about another tip from last week. Italian dressing. The low-calorie stuff is 5 calories a tablespoon. I put a recipe up in late August where I just chopped up all the non-starchy vegetables that I had lying around. I threw a half a cup of the low-calorie Italian dressing at it, and I was off to the races. It was more than 2 pounds of salad for 260 calories, right? I can't eat 2 pounds of salad. But let's say I'm back at 338 pounds. Okay, I've got 3,000 calories to play with for the day. I eat that salad for my lunch. Let's say I use another 700 calories on breakfast and snacks for the rest of the day. I've still got 2,000 calories for dinner. That's a lot of fucking calories. That means I can basically have anything I want on most menus. And all of that is a roundabout way of saying that sticking to a calorie deficit when you're invited out is going to come down to calorie management and learning to move your calories around. It's what I call a when issue. Our third question from the list today is about trauma eating, eating to protect yourself after a traumatic event, often after sexual trauma. I hear a lot from women who are talking about how they put on weight as protection. And I avoided this one because I don't feel qualified to speak to it. And I've avoided it because in some ways I am qualified to speak to it. It's not uncommon for me to get asked about trauma eating. It's kind of a pinnacle for emotional eating, right? I'm not a doctor, but it seems to make a lot of sense that food, and specifically eating to gain weight, to insulate yourself, to protect yourself, to make yourself undesirable, that they're all responses that make total sense. I gained a lot, most of my weight after a sexual trauma. Shortly after that, Sean and I were reunited and started the relationship that we're still in 27 years later. When I would talk about or thought about why I got so big when I was big and as I was getting bigger, gaining weight, I laid a lot of it at the feet of just being so happy with Sean. I was in this absolutely amazing relationship. I'd been reunited with a boy that I'd had a crush on when I was 12 and 13 years old, right? And then we were separated for 5 years. I was incredibly happy, but I was dealing with a lot of other stuff too. And I can see now that there was likely a lot going on subconsciously that I wasn't in any way aware of. I had no need to insulate or protect myself from the man in my life, but subconsciously, I had reasons to insulate and protect myself just from men generally. But yeah, trauma eating makes it seems logical to me. It just makes sense. And there are all kinds of trauma. After a traumatic miscarriage, which was the third pregnancy that I lost, I trauma ate my way back over 200 pounds for the first time in a decade. I'd kept 201 pounds off for 9.5 years. And then that last miscarriage happened. And I don't talk about it beyond what I've already said. And in other episodes, with like with most traumas, there was more than one thing going on. I was trauma eating because the actual physical miscarriage was a deeply traumatic event for me. I was grief eating. I was rage eating. I was panic eating. I mean, that was 3 in a row. Well, I had a miscarriage, an ectopic pregnancy, and then another miscarriage. I was creeping up on 35, and we'd been trying for years. Trauma is complicated. There's usually a lot going on, and there is nothing wrong with therapy. I've done loads of it, and it's all been very helpful. There's no shame in getting help. Just in being aware that you're dealing with something, right? Acknowledgement is admitting that you're struggling to cope, and accountability is reaching out for the help that you need. It's okay to ask for help. It's okay to be struggling. You don't have to do it by yourself. There are things you can learn and ways to make it better, to make it easier to cope. It's okay to be afraid, but reach. Question 4 is pretty specific. What are gratitude practices? And it isn't that I've been avoiding this one. It's just that I'm not sure how to answer it. This is a huge topic. It isn't my lane. I'm not a gratitude expert. I know what works for me. I know the impact active gratitude has had in my life. I believe in the well-documented benefits, that of having gratitude practices. I'm just not sure how to articulate it, which I guess is why I've been putting this one off. So, what are gratitude practices? Well, they're ways you express gratitude, but kind of in a more formal way. And there are tons of them. There are so many ways to do it. My favorite dedicated gratitude practice is my gratitude journal, which is just an empty notepad, but it follows a specific formula. I answer a series of questions with bullet point answers. But the big thing for me is expressing it regularly. I try really hard to be grateful for little things and ordinary things. Gratitude it's been a massive force in my life and in the way that I try to move through the world. And when it comes to trauma eating, like we were just talking about, gratitude has been one of the biggest factors for me to getting it under control. When you're focusing on the things you're grateful for, it's harder to stay caught up in the misery and the hardship. The easiest way in is probably just to start noticing things to be grateful for. Start simple. Just find 5 things a day that you're grateful for. And it doesn't have to be fancy, life-changing stuff here. The mundane will do just fine. I've had days where I was grateful I made it into the shower, or grateful it didn't rain. I've been grateful for hot meals and cold cups of water. I've been grateful for finding a dime in the parking lot because it reminds me of my grandma, because she loved finding dimes and giving them away. It was her thing. You don't have to have some big ritualized thing with your little sand garden and special pillows. Like, just set an alarm on your phone with a reminder to take 3 minutes and come up with a list of 5 things you're grateful for right now. I've gone through periods where it's something I have to force myself to do. Like, I hit a point where if I was talking to my grandma, who I called twice a day, and we'd talk for hours, and one of us noticed that we were caught in being negative, which really wasn't hard to do given the state of things in her last years. I mean, she died at the beginning of last year and had spent all of COVID in a nursing home. But if we got caught up in feeling negative, we would find something to be grateful for, even if it was just the beautiful day or the fact that we both had dinner coming. You get back what you put out there. You see what you're looking for and what you're focused on. There's a term for this, and I had to Google it. But yeah, and then I quickly learned the reason why I couldn't remember this one. It's called the Bader-Meinhof phenomenon, or the frequency illusion. And yes, Frau Gladys, I know my German sucks. I only took it for 1 year in high school. I'm just doing my best over here. Okay, so whether it's pronounced correctly or not, the Bader-Meinhof phenomenon is where you start noticing something you've never noticed before, usually because you just learned about it. Or it's like when you buy a car and you've never seen that car before, but now it's everywhere because it's on your radar. Gratitude works like that too. The more you look for things to be grateful for, the more things that make you feel grateful will happen. Opposites might attract romantically, but gratitude doesn't really work like that. You can be the super hyper outgoing chick who draws the laid back introvert, but the sullen, sulking ball of misery rarely draws in gleeful gratitude, right? Like attracts like when you're talking about gratitude or positivity. And you can be grateful in the negative sense. Like you can be grateful shit didn't happen or didn't go as badly as you thought it would. Like your chit chat with Gladys still really sucked, but you held your own better than usual, and it could have been worse. Boom. Something to be grateful for. Gladys didn't suck as much, or at least she didn't suck as much from your current perspective. There are ways to be grateful without feeling thoroughly lame, right? I remember when all of this picked up a lot of steam, like everybody just went crazy for gratitude, right? Oprah went off the deep end. Everybody was talking about how gratitude was changing their lives. I get it. I'd swing from the rafters with this one too if I could. Gratitude has saved me from myself more than once. I am annoyingly and sometimes obnoxiously grateful. I will thank people for things they're thanking me for because I'm so grateful I had the chance to be helpful. I still have moments where I'm just watching the boys do something mundane, like run and play in the yard, or we'll walk up for a slushie and I'll just start crying because I feel so grateful to be here to see them run and play. It's been 8 years since the whole almost dying thing, the big one. And it still doesn't get old. I was separated from them for 5 months, and no, I don't usually talk about it. Here's what I'll say. I was in some pretty gnarly physical pain. Even if we leave the crash C-section and the Ogilvy syndrome, which is when your large intestine's paralyzed, it's not painful, but let's just leave them on the table. I had necrotizing pancreatitis. That's when it's so infected that parts of it die and just liquefy in your abdomen, right? Up until all of this happened, I would have told you that I had a very good pain tolerance. I now think I have a very low pain tolerance because the pain was excruciating. Being separated from my boys was agony. I got to learn what anguish feels like. One of maybe the best thing about English is the way there are so many words for similar concepts, different shades of meaning to the same overall idea, like pain, right? There are so many different kinds, so many different shades. Nothing hurt more than being separated from them. My 3 under 3. One of them was brand new. The only way I've ever been able to describe that pain is that it was like there was a box in my brain. And if I thought about them, the box would open and the brightest light that you have ever seen would pour out of it, to the tune of my own screams that were so loud I couldn't hear anything else. That was anguish. But I'm also not ashamed to admit that the pain from my pancreas had me screaming out loud at times too. Gratitude is what helped me keep the lid on the box. Being grateful for little wins, 30 more seconds standing, every step further than the day before walking, smaller heparin doses, whatever it was. But this is the point where I had to gump out because that's all I can say about that. My brain starts doing this PTSD stop viral, and it costs too much, and it's more than I have to give right now. I'll be super lame for a second though and say that I'm grateful to be aware of myself enough to know that I need to stop. Your list of things to be grateful for doesn't have to be sunshine and roses. It's okay to go dark. A win is a win. Be grateful that you can see it. And keep your gratitude relative. It's like everything else. Don't sit there thinking it's not okay to be grateful that you had 4 cookies instead of 6. It is. That's a win. It's a win to bring your lunch with you to work twice this week. That's a truckload more than 0 times. You don't have to wait to feel proud of yourself until you're only eating no cookies and you pack a lunch every single day. You can do gratitude incrementally. Number 5 is another heavier question. Did you struggle with emotional eating? How did/do you battle it? I've been avoiding this one because the answer is huge. I've got 70 episodes of this podcast, and I'm pretty sure all of them deal with battling emotional eating in some way. So it's intimidating for me to try and distill it down into a cohesive and coherent answer succinctly. But did I struggle with it? Oh, yeah, big time. I think anybody who's dealing with obesity is battling emotional eating on some level. Are there people who are obese and unable to lose weight for reasons other than emotional eating? Yeah, absolutely, for sure. I'm sure there's somebody out there. There are people who don't identify with being an emotional eater at all. Whether or not that's always the case is a whole other kettle of kittens, but that's, yeah. But if you've got a significant amount of weight to lose, you're still going to have to get to the root of things. And odds are pretty good. There's some comfort, reward, and cope stuff going on there. Taking a look at those three things is how you start to battle emotional eating, because they're the root. I've tried, I continue to try, but I'm still struggling to come up with a reason for emotional eating that doesn't tie back to one of those three things. We emotionally eat to comfort ourselves, to reward ourselves, or to help ourselves cope with positive and negative feelings. I used to cope with feeling secure and happy by eating a lot. So much that I started to conflate the happy feelings I was having because I felt secure with the happy feelings I got from eating. They started to feel like the same thing. And the real problem started when I didn't feel that same level of security and happy. So I started chasing the happy by eating more food. How are you using food? Specifically, which foods are you using for which emotions? I tend to reward myself with fatty foods. I like to cope with things that are crunchy, and I comfort with things that are soft or chewy. Yeah, it's important to look at the emotion side of it, but there's value in taking a real close look at the food. Sometimes you get so hemmed in by the emotions that you need to disrupt it to see the patterns and to understand what's driving you. And I know I always say it isn't about the food, and I'm still saying that. Even though you need to take a close look at the food, it isn't the food that you're looking for. It's the emotion behind it. Because here's the thing. If you want to manage your weight, you have to learn how to eat in a calorie deficit, but you have to learn how to do it while you're managing your emotions too. The toxic diet industry acts like we don't, but we very much do. If you can eat in such a way that you're in a calorie deficit and you're feeding yourself emotionally too, odds are one hell of a whole lot better that you're actually going to be able to keep going. That's why I say you should lose weight eating the foods you love. Give yourself the space to figure out both sides of the equation. You handle emotional eating by grabbing it by the horns and wrestling it to the ground. You can't do that if you're cutting carbs and processed foods and sugar. Question 6 this week is, any tips for hormonal weight gain due to hyperthyroidism and menopause? I've been avoiding this one because I don't like the way the answer makes people feel. That's the most straightforward way I can put it. I get this question a lot, and I really wish I had a better answer, or at least a different answer. This isn't my lane, and it's a whole subcategory in the weight loss community. And I see a fair bit of solid advice, and I see a fair bit of total nonsense. The reason I wish I had a different answer is because I feel like a broken record. No matter what's going on, if you're not in a calorie deficit, you won't lose weight. It's when you're consistently in a deficit and you're not losing weight that you need to talk to your doctor. You need to be certain that you're in a deficit, though. And that's the other reason I don't like answering this question, because it feels confrontational. And yeah, it's just me and my microphone, but I don't like this part because I know how it feels. And I totally get it. There is nothing more frustrating than being sure that you're doing all the right things and you're in a deficit and you're not seeing it on the scale. There has to be something else going on. And sometimes there is. Not nearly as often as we'd been led to believe, but there absolutely are factors that make losing weight harder. But those things factor in a lot less than we'd like to think. And these are beliefs that way predate social media, but it has for sure made them worse. I mean, I don't know if big boned is still a thing, but that myth has been around for ages. Metabolism, thyroid, hormones, all these things have been bandied about for generations now. And yeah, they definitely can be a thing, but not the way great Aunt Gertie thinks it's a thing. It's a rare thing, not an almost everybody thing like she and social media wants us to believe. And I get wanting to believe. I wanted it to be anything else. anything. I had my thyroid tested. I did all the tests. Because if it was my thyroid, it wasn't me. And I was super busy blaming myself and not blaming myself at the same time. Somehow in my mind, if it wasn't me, if it was something like my thyroid, then it would be easier to lose the weight. Maybe I'd have to change less. And I didn't want to change, especially what I was eating. I hated being fat, but I loved the food. I also had pretty much zero understanding of how many calories were in the food I was eating or how many my body needed. I thought, and I would tell people that I didn't understand how I could be so big when I was eating so little. Well, for a start, my views on how much food was a little and how much was a lot were completely skewed. I was also eating really calorie dense foods, super high calorie foods. And this bit, I really hate saying the most, but if you've never weighed your food, if you're eyeballing it and being like, well, the bag says 2 cookies is 120 calories, but you always take the 2 biggest cookies and you don't know how many grams 120 calories of those cookies are, you're not tracking accurately. And if you've hit the point where you are tracking everything and you're doing your best without weighing food, you need to figure out how many calories your body needs. BMRs change as our bodies change. It's your basal metabolic rate, the number of calories your body uses in a day. It can change over time or be different because of things like menopause or hyperthyroidism. The TDEE calculators are really good tools, but they're not universal, and they don't factor things in like hormones or what your highest weight was. Because this is the worst part. We know that if you have 2 women and they're the same height, age, activity level, etc., all that stuff, and they both weigh 150 pounds, but one of them used to weigh 300 pounds, she will need fewer calories to stay at 150 pounds than the lady who has always weighed 150 pounds. It's undeniably shitty, but that doesn't make it any less true. How many fewer calories the lady who used to weigh 300 pounds will need is going to vary, and you might have to play with it. If you're in this position where you're at your goal weight and you're trying to maintain, but you're gaining weight back, or if you're still trying to get to your goal, but you've stopped losing weight, you may need to drop your calories slightly and incrementally until you start losing again and figure out your own body's personal BMR and TDEE. Do you see why I don't like answering this one? I already feel like I'm in a shoot the messenger position a lot of the time, and this doesn't help. But maybe it does, because if you're in that position, which is going to take some serious self-awareness, and you're willing to acknowledge that you're in that position, either that you might not actually be tracking as accurately as you think you are, or your BMR and TDEE might not line up with the number the calculator says they are. If that's you, you now have something you can do about it. Accountability. I keep digging myself deeper with this one, don't I? But you can do this. I know that it sucks, but what's the alternative? Question 7 from our list is, what is your go-to when craving chocolates or sweets? The only reason I didn't directly answer this one here on the podcast is that I did a video about it for Instagram. My go-tos when I'm craving chocolate or sweets are chocolate and sweets. Pretty much every time. The food noise is just going to get too loud. An exception to this can be like right before bed for me. If it's close to bedtime and I really want to eat something, not necessarily just chocolate or sweets, but if I want to eat, right, I might go to bed instead. It's unlikely that I'm going to wake up wanting a Mars bar. I'll have other things to think about. That particular food noise will have probably stopped. But that's not an all the time thing. When I really want something, I'll let myself have a little so I don't end up eating a lot, because I will. You already know, that I don't think it's a good idea to cut out the foods you love. Eat whatever you want, just less of it. People think I say that to be glib, but that's because they're focused on the just less part. But the eat whatever you want part is just as important. And I know it's hard, that it feels like if you start eating them, you won't be able to stop. Sometimes you have to set a limit for yourself. And when you're struggling to stick with 4 cookies instead of 6, or 2 mini Mars bars instead of 3, ask yourself what you want more: the food or to get to a healthy body. If that's too broad a focus, it's a goal that's too big to see. Look closer. What do you want more? The extra Mars bar or to see a lower number on the scale this week? Still too broad? Okay, fine. What do you want more? The couple of extra cookies or to wake up tomorrow knowing that you did what you needed to do today to get off on the right foot now? Because when you stop to appreciate that, it feels pretty damn good. Focusing on wins like that will help you keep going forward. It will propel you forward. Heavy restrictions, things like switching to shakes or cutting out food groups or cutting out sugar or fat, swearing off chocolate completely, it doesn't work. It makes you feel desperate. By telling yourself you can have whatever you want so long as you're in a calorie deficit, which is what just less of it really means, right? When you tell yourself that, you're focusing on what you can have, which leads to less desperation, so less binging and overeating. And you're giving yourself the mental space to do the work on changing your relationship with food because you're not all wrapped up in finding alternatives for bread or learning how to ram your goal weight and protein down your throat every day. All that stuff is just a distraction. It's an especially good one because it seems like it's so helpful. And in the short term, sometimes it can be. But this is a long game thing. It's about overall sustainability. And I don't just mean being able to sustain things long enough to hit whatever number on the scale that's your goal. I mean being able to sustain things long enough to keep your weight off, to have the skills and habits you need to maintain your weight loss. And that starts while you're losing your weight, not after you get to the goal. You need a plan going into it, or you're already on shaky ground. Hitting your goal weight comes with a whole bunch of feelings, and you're going to have your hands full dealing with those. Because if it's all about the food, if that's been your focus the entire time you've been getting to your goal weight, what happens when you don't have to control the food anymore? What happens next? How are you going to stay there? You don't want to fly by the seat of your pants with this. You don't want to figure out how to deal with it when you get there. Because let's say you get to your goal weight. Awesome. But you haven't got a plan to get to your maintenance calories. You're probably not 100% on what that number actually is. And maybe you start to gain the weight back. That's going to bring up a whole bunch of feelings. And if you never learned the ways you use food, if you didn't do the work on your relationship with food, what are you going to do if the scale starts to go up and all these big feelings you're being flooded with are making it really hard to get back on track? You're a lot better off if you have a plan and if you've done that work so you can see the patterns, the dysfunction with food. You can see it coming, right? And you can head it off at the pass. Question 8 is kind of an oldie, but a goodie. Do you take probiotics or supplements? I've answered part of this. I have talked about supplements before. It's a question that comes in a lot. And I really love that because it means you're questioning the very convincing snake oil that they're out there peddling. So please keep sending your supplement questions. I will always send an answer. And I'm going to keep talking about them here periodically because it is a really important conversation to have. But the short answer is no to both probiotics and supplements, but I'm going to deal with them separately because they're very different things. I don't take either one because I'm not allowed. I've lost count of how many specialists have told me not to take supplements specifically, but I've got 3 off the top of my head who also forbade probiotics. But I have a very, very particular set of circumstances medically. I'm missing that piece of pancreas. All of my gallbladder is gone. I've got kidney disease, secondary diabetes. Like there's a big list. I'm also in Canada, and the additives in our supplement industry are largely unregulated. And that's what has the specialists in a tizzy. And I'm pretty sure that we've talked about all of that before. When it comes to probiotics, I don't have an opinion. I only know what's right in my extremely specific and not overly common set of circumstances. Are they necessary for weight loss? Nope. Do the calories in them still count? Yep. But that's pretty much my entire opinion. There's only one slot left on today's list of 9, and I've given it to Gladys. I seem to get myself into a fair bit of trouble fairly often when I comment trying to encourage others, which is kind of good because I don't ever have to reply if somebody gets nasty because it's not my page. But I really hate this shit a lot. Now, it's funny in this, for instance, because I was commenting on a post and encouraging the person who posted it because they were responding to being trolled. Someone was criticizing them for their calorie count, which was completely reasonable, by the way. The calorie count, not the criticism. This woman's working with a medical team. And she was talking about how restrictions can lead to binging for her, which is also a pretty common thing, right? She mentioned that if she lets herself have a little, she doesn't end up binging. Seems pretty smart to me. All I said was that I wished more people understood the way that restrictions leave us feeling deprived, which leads to more binging. That's it. And that's pretty much verbatim what I said. Well, it was enough. More than plenty, because out came the pitchfork wielding Gladyses, and boy oh boy, did I poke the bear. My favorite of their comments so far, and I know it's for me because they tagged me in it. It goes exactly like this. Or just put the fucking fork down. Take some accountability. The other thing about commenting on other people's posts is that people don't always know who I am. Clearly. It's like, dude, accountability is my jam. It's A number 3 in the 3A way. I'm all about accountability. I just recognize that it doesn't look the same for everyone. Another thing about commenting on other people's posts is that my audience, like on Instagram specifically, my followers on Instagram, are 97% female. So I don't see a ton of bro Gladyses. They're there, but most of my Gladyses are of the non-bro variety. I'm not a huge fan, as you know, of the Happy Bottom Brigade. I'm particularly not a fan of the bro glads. They can be really aggressive. I mean, look at this guy, right? The swearing, the barking orders. He seems to be missing some of the nuances going on here. When I started, I had 3,000 calories a day. Weight loss is a super relative process. I had to put the fork down plenty to go from 4,000 plus calories a day to 3,000. And if you think that was easy, good for you, Gladys. We're going to pop back to potatoes for a second, okay? I know it works, I promise. When I was talking about sticking to your diet, right, to your daily allotted calories, I brought up potatoes again. But because I was talking about volume eating, I said I wanted to stick with the super low calorie vegetables. So I stopped talking about potatoes. But here's the thing. Weight loss is a super relative process. If you're trying to save as many calories as you possibly can with your food choices, either for something like going over to dinner at somebody's place, or because you don't have much weight left to lose, non-starchy vegetables are a better choice. They're going to save you more calories. Potatoes don't necessarily fit that bill. But whether or not something is low or higher calorie is relative too. And the potato, the mighty, mighty potato, is the perfect example of this. 100 grams of red bell peppers, 20 calories. Your average non-sweet potato, just a regular old potato, is about 80 calories, 100 grams. 100 grams of your average pasta is about 130. 100 grams isn't a lot of pasta. You're going to have more than one serving, which means that if you switch to potatoes, because I am in no way suggesting that you ever try to switch to red peppers for pasta or even potatoes. You want to swap starch for starch where you can. I just mentioned the peppers to show you that there's a 60 calorie difference between them and potatoes and a 50 calorie difference between potatoes and pasta, right? Having potatoes, which are at the very top, number 1 of the satiety index with a 323. White pasta only scores a 119, which is only slightly better than white bread, which is the baseline score of 100. Having potatoes instead of pasta saves you a lot of calories when you take your portion into consideration. It's all relative to where somebody is with their journey. That's why I keep saying you need to meet yourself where you are. Keep your expectations reasonable. Use the 3A way to figure out what's actually going on and keep yourself moving forward. You could grab a copy of my free guide to getting started for the last time through the notes. My weight loss workbook, Disruptor, is on Amazon. The webinar is coming up shortly on the 2nd of October, and I'd love for you to join me. It's completely free. You can find more information on everything, including my 53-week-long online weight loss experience, all on the website, disruptingobesity.com. Next week, I'm coming back to cover 9 ways to make it easier on yourself. We all need that. Thank you for joining me. Keep trying, keep tracking. Don't be intimidated and don't give up. You've totally got this.
Thank you for listening to Disrupting Obesity with Charlotte Skanes. If you know it's time to take back control, lose the weight, and keep it off, reach out to me privately with a direct message on Instagram that says ready, so you can start disrupting obesity.